서퍼들의 좀 꿈을 실현할 수 있는 곳이라고 생각이 들어요. 왜냐면은 바다 같은 경우에는 차트가 없으면 이제 허탕을 치는 경우가 많은데 저희는 예정된 파도가 항상 일정하게 나오고 원하는 파도에 선택하셔가지고 이용을 하실 수 있다는 장점이 있어서 모든 서퍼들의 좀 로망이자 꿈이지 않나 그렇게 생각이 됩니다.
정신 건강에 좋은 것 같아요. 호흡을 참고 들어가지만 나한테 집중해서 내가 릴렉스를 해야지만 편안하게 다이빙을 할 수 있기 때문에 정신 건강 또 정신 건강으로 인해서 몸이 더 건강하고 편해지고 하는 것들.
이제는 딥탱크가 이렇게 많이 생겨서 예전과는 다르게 바다를 가지 않아도 깊은 수심을 즐길 수 있는 게 대한민국 프리다이버의 특권이라고 생각하거든요. 그래서 재밌게 즐길 수 있고 그리고 배워두면 해외여행 갈 때 너무 좋다.
In our headlines on this Thursday, September 18th, here in South Korea, the U.S. Federal Reserve lowers its benchmark interest rate by 25 basis points to mark the first cut since last December amid concerns of the labor market and economic growth. Meanwhile, prospects of U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping partaking in the APEC Leaders Summit in the Korean city of Gyeongju this autumn are growing. And over in the southern port city of Busan, director Park Chan-wook's latest big screen production, No Other Choice, opens Asia's largest film festival, which celebrates its 30th birthday this year. U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has announced a 0.25 percentage point rate cut, which is the first in 9 months and also the first in what is expected to be a total of 3 reductions this year. Our Kim Bo-kyung starts us off.
U.S. Federal Reserve has cut its benchmark rate by 0.25 percentage points. With the cut, the rate now stands between 4% and 4.25%. The decision on Wednesday local time marks the first rate cut for this year and the first since the Trump administration took office in January, as the Fed had held the rate steady since last December's cut. Speaking to journalists, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said the balance of risks has shifted as the downside risk of unemployment has increased.
While the unemployment rate remains low, it has edged up. Job gains have slowed, and downside risks to employment have risen. At the same time, inflation has risen recently and remains somewhat elevated.
In a press release, the central bank also mentioned a somewhat elevated inflation risk due to tariffs, though Powell said the effects of the tariffs on economic activity and inflation are yet to be seen.
Higher tariffs have begun to push up prices in some categories of goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation will be relatively short-lived.
One of the Fed governors, Stephen Myron, who was appointed by President Trump and only took office the day before the decision, actually voted for a bigger interest rate cut of 0.5 percentage points. According to the Fed's latest dot plot, which shows policymakers' interest rate projections, there could be 2 additional rate cuts this year in upcoming FOMC meetings in October and December. As a result of the September rate cut, the interest rate differential between Seoul and Washington has narrowed to 1.75 percentage points, with South Korea's rate being at 2.5%. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And investors here on the local bourse reacted favorably to news of the rate reduction by the U.S. Federal Reserve, with stocks here maintaining their strong momentum. Our correspondent Park Junan covers the market reaction and more.
Following the U.S. Federal Reserve's first rate cut of the year on Wednesday, global stock markets, especially in Asia, including South Korea, continued to rise. The Fed indicated a median federal funds rate of 3.6% for the end of this year, suggesting 2 additional rate cuts are likely at the October and December Federal Open Market Committee meetings. Policymakers then projected a median interest rate of 3.4% at the end of 2026 and a long-term target rate to stay at around 3%. Global stocks either rebounded or set new record highs following the Fed's plans for long-term interest rate cuts. U.S. stock indexes such as the S&P 500 and Nasdaq dipped slightly on Wednesday ahead of the interest rate decision, but recovered most of their losses after the announcement. Asian stocks rose to previous all-time highs the following day as investors viewed the Fed's stance positively, with expectations outweighing concerns over an economic slowdown. South Korea's Kospi gained 1.4% to break another high at over 3,460 points, led by semiconductor stocks. Japan's Nikkei 225 also claimed another record as it climbed to over 45,300 at the market's close, boosted by export-related shares' strong performances. Following the interest rate decision, South Korean government agencies said that they would plan appropriate fiscal responses. An official from the Bank of Korea stated that due to the Fed's first rate cut in 9 months, it has become easier for it to operate monetary policy with a focus on domestic economic conditions, inflation, and financial stability. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economy and Finance Koo Yoon-chul noted at a macro-financial meeting that global markets reacted largely in line with expectations to the Fed's rate cut, though sentiment was mixed as investors weighed the U.S. Fed chairman's remarks on lingering uncertainties. Koo also stressed that the ministry will closely monitor risks, respond swiftly if needed, and maintain constant communication with relevant agencies to ensure stability in the economy and financial markets. 박준환, Arirang News.
On the diplomatic front, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi sat down for talks and dinner in Beijing back on Wednesday to touch upon tensions on the Korean Peninsula and prospects of the Chinese leaders' presence at the APEC Leaders Summit in South Korea. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
South Korea and China reaffirmed their strategic cooperative partnership as Foreign Minister Cho Hyun met Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Beijing in their first face-to-face talks of the Lee Jae-myung administration. According to Seoul's Foreign Ministry, Cho and Wang met for 3 hours on Wednesday evening local time for talks and dinner at the Diaoyu-tae State Guesthouse. North Korea dominated the discussion. Cho emphasized the need for denuclearization and peace through dialogue and cooperation and urged Beijing to help bring Pyongyang back to dialogue. Wang replied that China would continue to play a constructive role for peace and stability on the peninsula and continue communicating with Seoul. Speaking to the media afterwards, Cho said Wang had provided an explanation regarding North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's visit to China earlier this month. While Beijing made no explicit mention of denuclearization, Cho noted China's policy on the peninsula appears unchanged. This would be reassuring for Seoul, as the North Korea-China summit raised concerns as statements from both sides did not address denuclearization, unlike in their previous 4 summits. Another focus was Chinese President Xi Jinping's possible visit to South Korea for the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju next month.
APEC being held this year in Korea and next year in China carries great significance. We hope President Xi will attend the Gyeongju leaders meeting.
Cho later told reporters he felt it was clear that President Xi intends to visit Korea at the end of October. Upon Cho's invitation, Wang replied that he looked forward to meeting again in Seoul, with October viewed as the likely timeframe. The Korean diplomat's visit to Beijing preceded protocol, as it was actually Wang's turn to visit Seoul first. This appears to signal South Korea's pragmatic diplomacy amid the heightened rivalry between the United States and China. Wang in fact highlighted China's version of multilateralism, signaling Beijing's efforts to offset US leadership.
We hope, together with Korea and the wider international community, to uphold a uncensored international system and to develop the global order in a fairer and more reasonable direction.
Cho explained that while South Korea will continue to strengthen its alliance with Washington, it will also pursue the mature development of Seoul-Beijing relations based on national interest and pragmatism. He also stressed the need to respect mutual concerns, objecting to China's unauthorized structures in the Yellow Sea. Wang replied that consultations are already underway and that the issue will be properly managed. The 2 ministers also discussed shifting economic cooperation from a vertical division of labour to a more horizontal partnership, with the aim of directly benefiting their citizens. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Acting U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Joseph Yoon says U.S. President Donald Trump will attend the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju this autumn. Speaking at the Korea-U.S. Alliance Conference here in Seoul earlier on Wednesday, Yoon added Mr. Trump and President Lee Jae-myung would meet again next month, following their successful summit in the U.S. last month. With regard to the 2 countries' alliance, he reaffirmed the commitment to stability on the Korean Peninsula and to broader global peace, prosperity and security, highlighting efforts to modernize the partnership. Meanwhile, President Lee Jae-myung says South Korea will manage its relationship with both the U.S. and China, quote, at an adequate level. In an interview with Time published on this Thursday, the president pointed out that Korea cannot simply return, quote, to the traditional equation of relying for security on the U.S. and economically on China, given the current changes in geopolitics.
He nonetheless added that South Korea could serve as a bridge between the rival countries to ensure relations that is, remain stable despite the competition, as Seoul shares democratic values with Washington and geographical proximity to China. Back in the U.S., an American development agency based in Georgia has highlighted the importance of inviting back the hundreds of South Korean engineers and technicians who were detained and later departed from the state following an ICE raid. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
An official from a public economic development organization in the U.S. state of Georgia says discussions are underway to bring back South Korean workers who were detained in a U.S. immigration raid earlier this month. Hugh Tollison, president of the Savannah Economic Development Authority, told the Savannah Morning News on Wednesday that it's very important for the workers to return. He explained that they are the only people with the technical skills to install equipment and train employees in battery cell technology at Hyundai Motor Group's joint battery plant with LG Energy Solution. Tollison did not provide details on how the workers' return might be secured. Meanwhile, a new report from the Congressional Research Service warned that the incident could strain U.S.-South Korea relations. The report noted concerns that immigration enforcement could conflict with U.S. efforts to expand domestic manufacturing through foreign investment. It also referenced the pending legislation known as the Partner with Korea Act. The bipartisan bill would provide 15,000 high-skilled visas for Korean nationals, helping to fill gaps in advanced industries like electric vehicles and batteries. Meanwhile, LG Energy Solution says its U.S. battery projects remain on track despite the recent incident. According to the Wall Street Journal, Lee Hyuk-jae, the head of the company's North America division, told reporters at an auto industry event in Detroit that LG is working very hard at all sites to ensure customers are not affected. LG Energy Solution is currently building 4 battery plants in the U.S., including the joint venture with Hyundai in Georgia. More than 310 South Koreans were arrested on September 4th at the Hyundai LG plant construction site in Georgia. U.S. immigration officials say they were working illegally, some on short-term or recreational visas that do not allow employment. They were detained for about a week before being released and returned to South Korea. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The first interpellation session of the Lee Jae-myung administration came to a close on this Thursday at the National Assembly. Thursday's Q&A centered on culture, education, and society. The main opposition, People Power Party, questioned the suitability of the education minister's appointment to office, while the ruling Democratic Party underscored the perceived failures of the current education system. Rival lawmakers also continue to clash over reform initiatives unilaterally sought by the ruling DP that clouded the interpellation from day one back on Monday. President Lee Jae-myung believes South Korea's future depends on its effective tackling of the challenges facing young people such as housing and jobs. To take a listen.
중요한 것은 청년의 문제의식과 관점이 청년 정책에 온전하게 반영돼야 된다는 것입니다. 청년들은 대한민국의 주역이자 또 회복과 성장의 원동력이기도 합니다.
Speaking at a weekly meeting with his top aides earlier on this Thursday, he vowed to build a reliable government that eases the burden and restores hope among younger Koreans. Also, ahead of this meeting, President Lee appointed 2 assistant secretaries for youth affairs, which are 2 newly created posts to promote policies for young people. In the southern port city of Busan, director Park Chan-wook's latest screen production, No Other Choice, opened Asia's largest film festival, which celebrates its 30th birthday this year. Our culture correspondent Park Gun-woo is there.
South Korea's southern port city of Busan has heated up, not because of the weather, but as star directors and actors walk the red carpet at the country's largest annual film festival. Among them were the main cast of the festival's opening film No Other Choice, Lee Byung-won and Son Ye-jin, as well as K-pop Demon Hunters director Maggie Kang and Frankenstein director Guillermo del Toro. 30 years, 30 stories. This year, the Busan International Film Festival is opening its new chapter in its cinematic journey. From its modest beginnings to today's grand stage, 3 decades of film history come alive here in Busan as the world now spotlights Korea's biggest film festival. South Korean star director Park Chan-wook's No Other Choice, which drew global attention after winning the International Audience Award at the Torrential International Film Festival, made its Asian premiere. The actors and director of the film expressed their excitement to finally share their hard work.
As an actor who'd worked on this film for a long time, I found it completely different every time I watched it, finding new details and mise-en-scene that I hadn't noticed before. It's truly a film that needs to be experienced in theaters.
Based on an American novel, the story was recreated in a Korean setting, reflecting themes of home ownership and patriarchy. Through this, the film portrays the limits and follies of the main character, something audiences will relate to.
On opening day, visitors flocked to the venue hours in advance, lining up for merchandise and rushing to reserve their seats.
I'm so excited because a lot of people and me myself, I think the lineup for Busan International Film Festival this year is especially really great. So I'm excited to see.
I've been coming for 5 straight years, but this seems like the biggest crowd so far. With the 30th anniversary, I'm expecting extended programs and richer content this year.
To mark the milestone, BIFF has prepared a range of special programs. One is the inaugural Busan Awards, a competition between 14 Asian movies taking place for the first time in the festival's history. They will be competing in 5 categories, including the Grand Prize and Best Director. This year also places a stronger focus on engaging audiences, with events more relevant to the visitors. A notable highlight will be the very first sing-along premiere of K-pop Demon Hunters in Korea. Altogether, the festival will showcase 241 films from 64 countries, promising global premieres and plenty of special programs to delight film fans worldwide. 박건우, Arirang News, Busan.
And in other news, heavy rain in Korea's coastal city of Gangneung was largely welcomed by the community there, whose members have been suffering through a severe drought for well over a month. Our Choi Soo-young has the latest.
Torrential downpours are making it almost impossible to see ahead, with excessive rain flooding some roads in Gangneung. The city in the eastern part of South Korea has been struggling with a severe drought for over a month.
It feels so overwhelming. I never realized how moving it could be to see so much rain in Gangneung.
Water levels in the Obong Reservoir, which supplies over 80% of Gangneung's household water, had dropped to just 11% last Thursday, causing the most severe drought in years. However, heavy rain that started over the weekend raised water levels by more than 23% this Thursday. In the region, a heavy rain warning was issued as downpours reached around 30 millimeters per hour. Water supply vehicles took a day off thanks to the rainfall after more than 15 days of delivering supplies.
I hope that water levels will keep rising and finally ease the water shortage in Gangneung.
So far, the water level at the Obong Reservoir has been rising for 5 straight days. Though it is still only about a quarter of the normal level, more rain upstream is expected to flow in, which should push levels higher. Choi Soo-young, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. U.S. President Donald Trump has begun his second state visit to the United Kingdom, welcomed with a royal ceremony at Windsor Castle. Trump and First Lady Melania Trump, who arrived in the UK late Tuesday, were formally greeted by King Charles III and Queen Camilla on Wednesday. The Prince and Princess of Wales were also there to welcome the visitors. A royal salute was fired and there was a carriage procession through the Windsor estate, followed by inspection of the Guard of Honor. The ceremonial display included bands from across the British Army branches, national anthems, and a fly past, which was scheduled but modified due to weather concerns. A lavish banquet was held in St. George's Hall later in the day, where King Charles said the special relationship between the US and UK has made us safer and stronger through the generations. A multi-billion-dollar U.S. technology investment deal, referred to as the Tech Prosperity Deal, was also announced as Trump's visit got underway. Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer are expected to sign a handful of deals on Thursday and hold a joint news conference. However, the visit also drew protests, with more than 100,000 people gathering in central London to protest Trump's policies. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced Wednesday the first U.S. weapons deliveries under a new NATO-led funding program, stating that they will include air defense missiles. Zelensky also said Ukraine has already secured weapons funding of over $2 billion through the prioritized Ukraine requirements list, with an additional $3.5 billion coming by October. The new mechanism, coordinated by U.S. and European allies, aims to streamline the delivery of critical U.S.-made weapons. Under the package, Zelensky said the initial 2 shipments, each worth $500 million, will definitely include missiles for Patriot air defense systems, along with munitions for high-mobility artillery rocket systems. These are considered key to countering increased Russian strikes, especially as cooler weather approaches and energy infrastructure is most vulnerable. The new initiative helps increase predictability and speed of weapons deliveries through allied funding rather than only direct U.S. funding. The European Commission on Wednesday proposed new plans to restrict trade with Israel and impose sanctions on its extremist ministers in response to the ongoing Gaza war. If adopted, the plans would suspend trade-related provisions of the EU-Israel Association Agreement and would be the EU's toughest response to the war in Gaza. It would also include the reimposition of tariffs on goods currently enjoying zero-duty status, which would affect approximately $6.87 billion of Israeli exports. The EU is Israel's top trading partner, accounting for 32% of its trade in goods in 2024. The proposals require a qualified majority among EU member states and unanimous support for sanctions against individuals. Finally, paleontologists in Peru on Wednesday unveiled the fossilized skeleton of a dolphin-like creature, estimated to be between 8 and 12 million years old. The remains were discovered in July in the Ocucaje Desert, an area south of the capital Lima, which was once part of the Pacific Ocean. Scientists say the fossil was exceptionally well preserved, with the coastal mountains shielding the seabed from strong currents, creating calm conditions ideal for marine life, which led to the well-preserved remains. Researchers have noted that the fossil helps them understand past geography and how the coastline has changed over time. 최지희, Arirang News.
It has rained occasionally throughout the country under cloudy skies. It has gotten a lot cooler with this rain. Today's daytime temperature rose to only 26 degrees Celsius in Seoul, similar to the average temperature for this time of year. Tomorrow will be somewhat chilly, with the daily high in Seoul dropping to 23 degrees. Rain is forecast again tomorrow. It will start raining in the western parts of the country in the afternoon and spread across the country at night. In particular, heavy rain of around 30 millimeters per hour is expected along the west coast around dawn and on Saturday. Rain will mostly stop later on Saturday morning. Tomorrow morning will start chilly at below 20 degrees in most parts of the country. Highs will move up to 24 degrees in Daejeon, 28 degrees in Busan. Cool autumn conditions will continue throughout the rest of this week. Please dress in layers. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session.
저희 누나가 발레를 하다 보니까 자연스럽게 누나 발레 학원에 따라가서 누나가 하는 모습을 보니까 저도 하고 싶다고 생각이 조금 들어서 발레 음악에 맞춰서 아무 춤이나 추다 보니까 그냥 그 음악에 맞춰서 제가 몸을 움직이는 게 재밌다고 느껴졌었는지 발레를 계속 하고 있더라고요. 나이가 좀 어릴 때 제가 가진 장점이 무엇인지도 모르고 아예 제가 가진 단점도 모를 때 발레를 시작했다 보니까 제일 큰 문제가 이제 평발이었던 것 같아요. 평발이다 보니까 발레를 할 때 쥐가 조금 많이 나는 편이라 그거를 견뎌가면서 춤을 계속 춰야 했던 거 그게 가장 극복하기 힘들었던 것 같고요. 제가 다리가 다른 친구들보다 조금 두껍다고 해서 제 다리를 조금 싫어했었는데 근데 이제 로잔에 갔다 오고 나서 오히려 제 다리에서 나오는 파워풀한 힘이 좋았다고 해주시는 분들도 있다는 걸 느껴가지고 그 두 개가 가장 극복하기도 힘들었고 기억에 남는 것 같아요. 프릭스티 로잔이라는 콩쿨 자체가 학생들 사이에서는 가장 크고 의미 있는 콩쿨이다 보니 제가 그 로잔 영상을 보면서 자라왔기 때문에 그 무대에 서서 제가 춤을 췄다는 것 자체가 엄청 인상 깊었던 것 같아요. 제가 걸어왔던 길, 이게 맞는 방법일까? 근데 그런 의구심을 다 없앨 수 있게 제가 가는 길이 맞았다라는 거를 확인시켜줬던 것 같아요. 그래서 그런 감정이 들어서 조금 감격스러웠던 것 같아요. 한 배역에만 잘 할 수 있는 명수가 아니라 어떠한 배역을 받아도 다 넣어서 소화해낼 수 있는 그런 스펙트럼이 넓은 명수가 되고 싶습니다.
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang.
On Press Perspective today, we touch upon prospects of anti-Americanism here in South Korea in light of the recent raid, disturbing detention and subsequent departure of hundreds of South Korean engineers and skilled technicians from Georgia. Hello and welcome. It's Thursday, September 18th here in Seoul, and you're watching Press Perspective. It's that time of the week during which we address a number of diverse news stories related to South Korea. For more on this, I have Fabian Kretschmer with German news agency DPA here in the studio. Fabian, welcome back.
Nice to be here.
I also have writer Colin Martian with the pundit's take on the day's discussion. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me back.
Fabian, let's begin then with the concerns shared by the foreign media about prospects of anti-American sentiment here in South Korea, following, of course, the raid and detention of South Korean workers at the Hyundai plant in Georgia.
Yeah, nowadays the notion is that Koreans feel like they've been stabbed in the back by the US government, even more so since the workers who were detained in Georgia share their stories in the media now and their experiences, which are frankly very horrible. So right now it's not a good time, for the US-Korea alliance. But if we talk about anti-American sentiment here, I think we have to put it into perspective. There were some incidents in 2002, for example, two schoolgirls in Yangju in Gyeonggi province. They were killed during a roadside accident. The two GIs who were driving the tank, they were found not guilty by a military court. That has sparked a lot of mass protests, and there was a feeling of injustice. And 2008, another incident where it was about beef exports from the US to South Korea, which some rumors said that the beef was infected with some mad cow disease that actually turned out not to be true, but that also sparked mass protests. So if you compare that to those incidents, I think the anti-American sentiment is nowhere near as high as it used to be. And maybe one reason is also, Trump has kind of united Koreans a little bit in viewing the US more critically, and he has damaged a lot of trust, I would say. But it has also sparked a debate that, for example, if South Korea were to emancipate or distance itself more from the US, then of course there would be some inconvenient truths also. Then South Korea would have to shoulder more defense costs, more defense spending. And I think many Koreans view the US more critical nowadays, but also more realistic, I would say. But the anti-American sentiment that you can see on the far left is, I think, only a niche here.
Right. Colin, authorities here in the meantime are also conducting thorough review to determine whether or not there were any human rights violations during the raid and detention in Georgia. What are your thoughts regarding the response here in South Korea to the event that took place in the US?
Well, as luck would have it, I was burning the midnight oil on a piece about that very subject last night. And one unsurprising element of the reaction in the Korean media is a criticism of the Donald Trump administration, a diagnosis of Trump himself or the administration as having a paradoxical or contradictory view of foreign capital or foreigners themselves. The U.S. wants investment, they say, but they don't want foreigners. So how is that going to work? You pressure foreign countries like Korea to invest in the U.S. or, realistically, offer generous tax breaks in the case of the factory in Georgia, but then you don't issue the visas that are needed for technicians to come from Korea and get the place up and running. Now, in the US, if you look at American social media or the American sort of wings of social media in general, you'll find a lot of, how to put it, suspicion of the idea that no American could have been hired to do these jobs to get the factory up and running. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. I'm not in a position to say. But in the Korean media, this is sort of taken as given that yes, they need these people, they need the technicians they brought over to the US to get the place working. And from that point could then hire Americans once the factory is up and running. But more surprising, or maybe not as predictable to a foreign audience or people in the West, is the fact that much of the Korean media coverage doesn't end with criticism of the U.S., criticism of Trump, criticism of this contradictory attitude, but criticism of South Korea's government itself as well. You know, why has not the government done more to guarantee its citizens the ability to work abroad? Why has the South Korea not negotiated for more visas to be made available to South Korea, more U.S. visas to be made available to South Koreans? I was listening to a Korean podcast about American affairs, and the hosts, who are Koreans in the U.S., were complaining about this, saying, you know, Australia has its own category of visa, its own category of work visa in the U.S., and compared to Koreans, you never see an Australian in the U.S. So they say all of our lawmakers here in Korea, they're constantly going back and forth to the U.S. What are they doing? Why has their lobbying been so effective? Been so ineffective? How are they even lobbying? So there is a sense in which the Korean media and Koreans themselves are expressing frustration with South Korea as well for not making it more possible, for not making it easier to arrange the proper visas to prevent these kinds of incidents from happening in the future. Many pieces have said, take this as a warning. Something good could come of this, but only if South Korea takes seriously what needs to be done to ensure that there won't be another raid like this. There won't be Korean technicians jailed for a week. But there is some skepticism as well as to whether that will be possible.
Right. And speaking about visas, Fabian, concerns have also been raised about proposed visa restrictions for foreign journalists working in the U.S. Could you walk us through these restrictions and their broader implications?
Yeah. So right now, journalist visas in the US, they are valid of up until 5 years. That's quite generous. But the restrictions would basically mean that journalist visas would be only valid for 240 days, or roughly 8 months. And actually for Chinese journalists, it would be only for 90 days. And that's nothing. And I think what the effect would be that as a journalist in the US, you would be caught up in this loop of applying for a new visa, then waiting until it's issued, then you have the visa, and then it's already time to apply for a new one. I know this method only from authoritarian states. In Russia, for example, but also in China, where I lived, it was the case that when the authorities didn't like some of your reporting, they would restrict your press card that is normally valid for 1 year down to 3 months, in some cases even 1 month. And then you can never basically feel secure. There's some kind of self-censorship maybe that might get triggered, because who knows if the next month you can still live in that country. And I think that's exactly the reason why this method is suggested by the Trump government. They want power over the correspondents. They want to intimidate correspondents who report critical. I say this because there were several cases also among German correspondents in the US that were singled out. For example, the former US ambassador to Germany, who now holds a post also within the US administration, criticized one specific correspondent from the public broadcaster, saying he should, get his visa cancelled. And this is a very dangerous development. And I think the answer can only be political, that correspondents unite, tell their governments, you should address this. You put this on the agenda the next time our head of state meets with Trump, and then they should negotiate and make clear that press freedom is a human right that should not be touched.
Right, and when deciding on visa or green card applications, the Trump administration reportedly plans to vet social media for any anti-American ideologies. What has been the response to this?
Yes, anti-American ideologies. To look at this as an intellectual exercise in a charitable way, we could say, well, of course, any country would be interested, would be invested in preventing those who hate it from residing there. I mean, if I were to say, oh, I hate South Korea, I hate all it stands for, I think it's a force for evil in the world, could I have a visa? I wouldn't expect to get one. I'll put it that way. But in the US, this sets off some alarm bells with people. It sends their minds back to the 1950s, for example, the Cold War, in the era of strong anti-communism, which overstepped its bounds. I think historians often come to that conclusion. That is also the ideology on which the Republic of Korea is founded, by the way, US anti-communism from the Cold War era, but that's a separate subject. I think the public reaction in the US is also one of perhaps confusion, because this is pretty vague. Anti-American ideologies, that leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And once you put this into the hands of a vast bureaucracy, under the Trump administration or any administration, the potential for abuse, I mean, it seems like more than potential for abuse, it seems guaranteed. So if you're going to do this kind of vetting, you need some very strict guidelines about what is to be allowed and what is not to be allowed. But anti-American ideologies, which is also the language from the 1950s used in bills from that era, that just sounds like, it sounds like that can be used as a fig leaf to cover almost any denial of entry or almost any deportation. And so it would be wise to look at this critically and demand at least a stricter definition of what they're looking to weed out, if not an avoidance of the whole deal.
Right. Fabian, let's move on to another topic now. Earlier this month, President Lee Jae-myung formally launched the National AI Strategy Committee. He serves as the chair of a 50-member public and private presidential committee, which will aim to raise South Korea to join the top 3 world AI powerhouses. Could you tell us a bit more about the committee's initiatives?
Yeah, the committee was launched in downtown Seoul in the iconic Seoul Square near Seoul Station. And the 3 policy pillars are that the committee should foster an AI innovation ecosystem, a nationwide AI transformation, and it should contribute to a global AI foundational society. That sounds a little bit vague, but I tell you in plain language what could be achieved. First, it's a kind of joint venture between the public and the private sector. So some business men and women are are also members. Then of course some ministers, and you get the knowledge from academia. And I think South Korea wants to generate a new engine of growth. That's one thing, but also it wants to manage the possible disruptions by AI. I mean, AI will have a lot of implications that we don't maybe grasp yet. I think in the future will show, and I think Lee Jae-myung, the president, wants to be very proactive in shaping that future. Let's see how that will work out.
Right, he'll also be talking about the AI when he heads to the UN next week. Colin, findings show that 8 out of 10 South Koreans believe AI will have a positive effect on society, and they believe or they trust the answers provided by AI. What are your takeaways from this latest findings, and what have been some of your interactions with AI as a writer? I believe we talked about this a while back.
A bit, but yes, that finding is not so surprising. If you live in Korea and you go to the big bookstores here, what's the first thing you see these days? A table, Hello AI, a theme like that, covered in books, all very recently published, about how to use AI, how to use it to your advantage, how to study better with AI, how to increase your IQ with AI, how to make more money with AI, get rich with AI. They're all there, and they're multiplying by the week, these books, translations of books, or even more so, books written in Korean. The interest in artificial intelligence is huge in Korea, no doubt about it, and that makes sense when you think about any personal technology that has been developed and used in Korea, developed anywhere but used here. Smartphones, for example. When I first moved to Korea, smartphones, I mean, they were big in the US, but there were still a lot of people who weren't using smartphones, especially of the older generations. Come to Korea and, grandma's got the smartphone. Grandma's in line for the next iPhone, or Samsung phone, more like, Galaxy phone. And so there is that sense of early adoption here. There's a culture of early adoption and just getting on board with whatever the technology might be. And you could say, well, this is a good thing. It's adaptability. It shows Korea's willingness to change. I mean, it's changed so much, Korean society. You have to have that willingness. You have to have that ability. Also, you might say it's a bit uncritical. There's not a sense of thinking, stepping back, thinking, do we really want to use this? What are the implications of this technology? In the US, over AI, you could say there's been a bit too much of that. Perhaps. It might be just the conversations I hear, but when AI gets brought up in sort of on American social media or in American publications, often it's about the dangers, the potential dangers of artificial intelligence. And it's, will superintelligence emerge? Will it destroy us all? A major critic, an American critic of AI, brought out a book recently called, let me get this right, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. So an unambiguous title, for sure. I was reading a review of this book recently, and the reviewer quoted a statistic saying that 2/3 of Americans who are aware of AI, many aren't. I mean, many Americans haven't heard of ChatGPT. So let's get that out there. But 2/3 are against it, 2/3 view it negatively and expect to be harmed personally by it. So this is a large, stark contrast with South Korea. But if you look at the natures of the societies, you can kind of see why. You can see why people would be more approving of it here, or if not necessarily approving, they'd be more apt to see it as inevitable and just something you should take advantage of than in the US. Now, my experiences, as I believe I've said here, when I have to write about K-pop, it always helps because I'm not too familiar with the K-pop landscape, but you know, it helps to start thinking about an issue. ChatGPT or other chatbots can't really write for you. Maybe if you're a student, you can, I mean, we know students do this, but if you're a professional, it's a different story. But you know, if I want to find out, I was doing a radio segment recently on Korean name culture, you know, where Korean names came from, when family names were introduced in Korean history, and I typed into a chatbot, compare and contrast when Korea, or how Korea introduced family names versus how Japan and China did it. And there it was, all lined up, like the exact differences and similarities, a historical timeline, and that helped me think about what I was going to say. I did other research after that, but it gave me a basis, it gave me a framework to think about it. And I still had in mind, like, you know, verify this, don't trust everything it says. But then people said the same thing about Wikipedia. I mean, those of us of a certain age remember in the early 2000s, Wikipedia is not a credible source, don't trust it, don't use it for anything, don't believe anything you read on Wikipedia. Now, I mean, it's regarded as one of the most trustworthy sources. So the discourse, to my mind, sounds a bit similar, reminiscent of how it was about Wikipedia 20 years ago. It's repeating itself with ChatGPT and other chatbots.
Right. Fabian, staying with surveys, another study shows that the fear of aging appears to be higher among South Koreans. What are your takeaways from this particular reality?
Yeah, this study is quite interesting. It was done by researchers from Hanyang University here in Seoul, and it showed that not only Koreans in general have a higher fear of aging, but within Koreans, women, young people in general, and had like an even more higher fear about aging. And I mean, I thought about that a lot, and I think it kind of makes sense, but it's also a little bit ironic because in Korea, I mean, that's a Confucian society. At least that's what you always read in the media reports. But sometimes you get doubts about that when you see that, you know, in a Confucian value system, age is honored, it's appreciated. But in Korea, age also means, or it comes with some kind of stigma. With aging, you lose your economic potency, to say it like this. I mean, for example, poverty among seniors is very high. Then, of course, the health system and the pension system, especially among the older generation, is not as sufficient as it maybe should be. So many people are afraid of aging because they think they lose their income. They are afraid of, you know, losing their health, which, I mean, those are normal fears, but maybe they might be a little bit exaggerated here in South Korea. And then, of course, you have a big obsession with youth and beauty. I think that's also in Korea higher than maybe in some other countries. At least many European countries, I would say it's not as stark. I would say that there's a big obsession about it. So I would say it makes sense, but it should also give food for thought and maybe should serve as a reflection point, maybe that we overdo it with youth obsession.
I wonder then, Colin, what do you believe is fueling this fear of aging, and what does this reality tell you about the Korean society going forward?
Yes, as Fabian referenced, there are two phenomena happening here at once. You have the, I don't want to say reverence, but deference to age that still exists here. It's built into the language. I mean, when you're at a table and you pour the first shot of soju, what do? You look away from the oldest person at the table. But then the oldest person has to pay later. So, I mean, it balances out in the end. But, of course, any outside observer would be forgiven for assuming there was a sort of cult of youth going on in South Korea as well. What with the plastic surgery or the fact that K-pop performers tend to be at the center of the culture, at least popular culture, and they're about 21 on average, if not younger. So yes, you have these two conditions going on at once. But I would look back to this survey itself, and I did note when I was reading about it that the survey data showed that people were less afraid of aging when they were married. So the unmarried were more afraid of aging, and those with 0 or 1 children were more afraid of aging than those with 2 or more children, at which I breathed a sigh of relief, having 2 at home myself now, as of a month now. But I think this is reflective of a fear of just not being able to get life started. If you're not on the track, the sense that you never will get on it is pretty strong here. So if you don't have the elements in place of a good life, there's a fear that you never will get them in place, especially if you get a little older. The sense of you having missed your shot, I think, becomes palpable. But we should pay close attention to those differences, and this kind of ties into a narrative that I've been noticing in Korea for a long time, which is that, how to put it, the difficulty young people have in getting their lives started, whether it's housing costs or whether it's early salaries or whether it's sort of the culture around dating and marriage changing or views about it getting more negative. So yes, they might look at these surveys themselves, young people, and think, okay, that all makes sense. You know, you'll be less worried about aging if you're married, if you have a family sort of developing, if you have a career that you're on the right path with. But if you don't, you know, it might make you even more despairing. You think, okay, well, how am I going to get that? So yeah, you can see these playing out in these numbers, but also in society itself. And as I think Fabian just referenced offhandedly, the elderly poverty is very visible here. This is not a country in which poverty is highly visible, not like in the US, where there are people living in the streets of major cities. But here, even in Seoul, even in the richest parts of Seoul, you do see older people sometimes pulling very heavy carts laden with cardboard, which they're collecting as their main means of income. And so I think when somebody in Korea sees that, or when that's a part of the background, when that's sort of ambient in your life, naturally you're going to think, okay, how do I avoid that? Can I avoid that? It's a fate that's always sort of presented to you. I mean, in any society, if you want to understand that society, you have to think of who the underclass is. And unfortunately, in Korea, look at who's doing some of the work nobody else wants to do. It's older people. So that itself tells you a lot right there about why Koreans would fear aging. You know, I just don't want to end up down there, as they would say it.
Right, which is something the society, of course, is aware of, and the government is seeking, of course, to address.
Indeed.
All right, Colin, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Fabian, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that ends Press Perspective for today. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.
천년을 이어온 우리의 지혜가 제천에서 다시 태어났어. 세대를 관통한 선조들의 건강 빅데이터. 빅데이터. 우리의 삶과 들에서 자란 천연물은 단순한 재료가 아니야. K-내추럴. 한국인의 정체성을 담은 바로 살아있는 역사질. 천년의 처방이 첨단 기술과 만나는 순간. 글로벌 천연물 시장의 중심 제천에서 2025년 9월 20일부터 10월 19일까지 천년의 지혜를 담은 미래를 만나봐.
A country where traditional and modern cultures coexist.
Where you can explore spectacular landscapes and nature.
Savor the delights of traveling at every turn.
Where? Korea, of course.
There are some must-visit places in Korea. Ones that appear in every tour guidebook: Hangang River, Gyeongbokgung Palace from the Joseon Dynasty, and...
Yes, these are essentials, but I want to go somewhere a little different. I don't have to follow the guidebook. For example, filming locations for K-pop music videos or K-dramas and movies.
Traveling is all about taking it slow. A long walk at your own pace, or even zoning out somewhere quiet. Doesn't it sound relaxing?
You travel for the experience, trying something new in a foreign place, de-stressing and making lifetime memories, taking tons of pictures along the way.
70% of the Korean territory is mountainous. Naturally, hiking is a very popular pastime in Korea. Not your kind of activity? Trust me, the view will make the effort worth it. Just catch your breath by the cold stream in the valley.
Korea is surrounded by the sea on three sides. From the beach, you can enjoy a wide open view as well as various water activities. But the riverside is great too. There's plenty to see and do.
If you're in Korea, you can't miss the night view full of dazzling lights.
Yes, even the same place can have a totally different vibe at night.
Want to make unforgettable memories?
How about traveling to all corners of Korea? Join us next time to explore more about Korean culture.
저희가 매일매일 자동차를 타고 일상생활에서도 쉽게 사용을 하는데 그런 자동차에서 타이어는 계속해서 버려지고 있거든요. 전 세계적으로 10억 개 이상 버려지고 있는데 특히 소각 처리될 경우에는 대기오염 물질들이 여러 가지가 나오게 되고 매립됐을 때는 지하수나 토양오염 물질들이 많이 방출되게 됩니다. 저희는 그런 타이어들을 어떻게 잘 처리할지 좀 고민을 했었습니다. 타이어가 가지고 있는 접지력이나 내마모성이 좀 우수하다고 생각을 했고요. 저희는 타이어 하나로